Welcome to In the City, Bloomberg's podcast connecting you to the conversations and the stories shaping the world of finance. Now, with me for this episode is a group that you will continue to hear a lot more of on In the City. Of course, listeners know Allegra, who's here.
Hello.
And recently, we also heard the opinion columnist Adrian Wooldridge.
Good afternoon.
This is fun. We all got dragged in here at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday because Jeremy Hunt has just finished delivering his budget, maybe his last one, before we go to the elections. And I don't know what we've actually make of it all. Budget day, he confirmed a lot of widely expected things.
Absolutely. I think everything big in that had been very, very widely trailed. There was nothing really exciting or new in it.
Is this a good or a bad thing? So Marcus Ashworth, also from Bloomberg Opinion, said, look, he was outraged because it's really Parliament that should have heard about this first. Does it make a difference, or is it just to try and make sure that the markets, they are not surprised and they kind of get a sense of the voter?
It's how modern media management works. I mean, you can be as outraged as you want, but it's the newspapers that hear first and Parliament that hears last.
As a former Treasury head of communications and head of strategic communications, I hate it. I really hate it. And I tried to do, when I was in the Treasury, I tried to do a budget where nothing leaked because so you've got leaking and then you've got pre-managed briefing, which is mostly this. But I think some of the managed briefing is because you assume it's going to leak. So you kind of trickling out what you want and the narrative you want. This is not me as my former Treasury self, but rather the people in there right now and in the recent budgets, they're managing the narrative so they can try and manage their people. And otherwise, something gets leaked and they can't manage that story. So it's sort of the two are goes hand in hand. But you are ending up with a situation like today where you almost have nothing left. And Marcus, dear Marcus, is getting outraged on behalf of Hansard and parliamentarians, and rightly so. But there's also a sort of sense for the rest of us around where is that kind of statecraft where we are used to budgets in not so long ago where it was real surprise. There was one, though, which was the child benefit, which was not quite so extensively. And I think that is something that's potentially interesting around the kind of voters they still want to be trying to connect with.
I get a sense that it was a big problem with expectations management over this budget. That a month or so ago, the expectations that they rose were quite big, that this would be quite a big budget, that they had quite a lot of headroom for manoeuvring. And then the OBR came back and said, oh, wait a minute, I don't think you've got that money. And the money available for giveaways seemed to contract over the last month. And the government was then caught in catch-up, trying to manage expectations down a bit.
And what was this a budget for? Is it really to get voters? I mean, the fiscal headroom was so small that actually there's not, they couldn't really have done a bazooka or anything like that.
Yeah, it was not, as a Jeremy Hunt fan, it was not brilliantly handled because, as you say, Adrian, you went from a situation where almost as soon as the last fiscal event finished, they were briefing there'll be more, there'll be more, there'll be more. And then they've been in a situation where they've kind of pared back what the more is. And that is in the context of, a set of backbenchers who are just desperate for more. And so they, potentially they'll be quite happy today because they'll think the job is done of, another tax cut has been achieved. And, that is fundamentally Sunak and Hunt's kind of lodestar, philosophical creed, etc. So I think, they won't be too focused on eke. We kind of got ahead of ourselves there and we got away with it. And whether or not they did get away with it, I mean, we've yet to see, as we're recording this so early, but we've yet to see, what the backbench opinion will be, whether it was a nothing burger or whether actually they feel he's done enough.
Against that, I'd say two things. One is that it was quite a political budget in the sense that he was quite constantly trying to draw red lines between himself and the opposition. You're the high tax party, you're the undisciplined spending party, we're the low tax party, fiscal responsibility. And he also got a dig at the Liberal Democrats, which I thought was quite interesting since they're quite an important opponent. And the second thing was the issue of trying to cut national insurance even further. There were promises that double taxation of income is a very bad thing. We want to get rid of it or at least reduce it. I can think of two possible interpretations of that. One is that there's going to be another significant fiscal event before the next election. This was indicating that the election would be some time off. Or the other was just throwing a bit of red meat at the backbenchers to make sure they don't get so upset.
But I wonder also whether the Chancellor was really speaking to the markets, right? The memory of Liz Truss, frankly, lives on. And so maybe it was better not to roil or panic the markets than, deliver an underwhelming speech.
One of Labour's better sort of barracks, I thought, was "Where's Liz?" Somebody was shouting because there was a lot of noise in the chamber.
But I think the thing I was most interested to see was that they didn't pay for it by reducing spending into the next Parliament, but it's due to increase by 1. And the rumour that was quite again, probably pre-briefed by Hunt's advisors was around, do you pay for that? Which is what many backbenchers would like, by reducing public spending. And he was quite keen to make heavy weather of the fact he'd not chosen to do that. And because I think, we've talked about it on this pod. In fact, the three of us together have talked about this just last week, this idea that the evidence is the polling and people are against tax cuts over reducing public spending. So him sort of swerving that, like clearly looking at it, contemplating it, because it would have appealed to some of his people, but deciding not to do it, I think was probably the right decision. I think that it wouldn't have been very Jeremy Hunt.
I mean, the guilt sales are a little bit. I mean, he did, and this is something that Alex Wickham put in the blog, that if you look at it from a rational point of view, I think there are 7 points where actually taxes are more or less going up, and there's the non-dom system is abolished. There's a new vape tax, a one-off increase in tobacco duty. Business class air duty is going up. Holiday home lettings regime will be abolished, and multiple dwellings relief will be abolished. So all of that is money coming in.
Absolutely. And I think, a political budget in that it was drawing lines with Labour. But in fact, what's so interesting is that both Labour and the Conservatives are quite close together on all sorts of things. The stealing of Labour's clothes on the non-dom was one interesting example of that. But we have a sort of generally fairly managerial, sensible approach by both the Labour Party and the Conservative budget. This is not the world of Corbyn or the world of Liz Truss. It's the world of centrist politicians. One thing I did think was interesting in the budget, and I think is worthy of conversation, is the issue of productivity improvement. Because on the one hand, productivity improvement can sound like nothing. You might say we want greater efficiencies. Everybody wants greater efficiencies. What's wrong with that? But on the other hand, we do have to get a productivity increase from the public sector if we're not going to tax ourselves to death, or if the public sector isn't going to fall apart. And there were some quite interesting ideas mentioned about the use of IT and various other things, about particularly in the National Health Service, and trying to spread that. We have had a fall in productivity since the pandemic, and we do need to drive productivity growth in the public sector. So that was an attempt to talk about it seriously, I think.
Yeah, it felt to me like that was almost a sort of Jeremy Hunt legacy item, that he wanted to say, this is distinctively me. This isn't something you'd have heard Sunak do. I mean, I'm sure Rishi Sunak was fairly kind of out of his textbook too, but sort of this is the one thing that he will have done in depth, because it wasn't normally in budgets you hear these things and they're just glancing references, but actually this one he went through all the different public services and listed how they could be used in granular detail.
And he was in charge of the National Health Service for 5 years, so he knows just how much money is not efficiently used, and there is a potential with IT and the rest of it to improve form filling and bureaucracy and things like that. So, if we can't improve the productivity of the public sector, we're in a real mess.
The US, of course, have done it really differently. I mean, their productivity is kind of going through the roof thanks to also immigration.
In the private sector. In the public sector, I mean, the world's most wasteful health service is the United States Health Service. Is incredibly bureaucratic because there's so much duplication. The other thing I thought was quite interesting politically, and he kept making this point, was that we want to boost national productivity without just relying on lots of cheap immigrants. He made that point over and over and over again, almost as if to say the central offer from the Labour Party is just bringing in more immigrants and boosting the overall size of the economy rather than boosting productivity. I'm not quite sure why he was doing that, but it was a point that he made at least 3 times.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think it's also interesting because you described it earlier, Adrian, as stealing the Labour clothes. It's interesting because it's not just that. He's stolen Labour clothes, but he's also stolen their money because they were going to be doing certain things in a certain way. We can do this sort of little extra Labour things that make it worth a Labour government because we're going to have done non-doms and other measures. And he's now taken that. And so it changes the baseline, as everyone will know.
What's the first thing that Labour would actually reverse if they came into power in this budget? Is there anything?
Hard to think, actually. Hard for them to come into power and increase national insurance or something like that. And again, central to Rachel Reeves's policy is addressing making work pay, which she's been talking about a lot very recently. And the other thing about making work pay is trying to reduce the number of people who are of working age but not working. Again, that's another area where both parties are singing from the same hymn sheet, rightly so, I think.
So while we've been speaking, what they've gone on is that Rishi Sunak, in his leadership manifesto in 2022, remember that, he promised an income tax cut, so a more vanilla, straightforward, rather than this making work pay next cut. Now, of course, it's powerful because I think that's where the Conservative politics is going to come in the next few weeks, which is they will grumble that they have, yes, they've got this, but they wanted more. And so Starmer is having fun on that front. It's difficult because is it necessarily something that Labour would do better? So but he's just having fun making the pain for the internal party Conservative politics even more painful.
I mean, I want to ask, how do you win elections in this case? Is it actually just making sure that the budget is not inflationary so that the Bank of England can get on with cutting rates, which would help with mortgages and make people feel a bit richer?
I don't think this makes much difference for the election. I think basically people are exhausted by the Conservative Party and they want to change. I think that they're trying to change the narrative. I mean, the Conservatives are. I don't think there's much room to do it. It's people have made up their mind.
So I think a slightly different thing, which is why we're in the same room, which is I think it's necessary but not sufficient, in that old phrase, in that, they needed to not drive the car into the wall today. But equally, they've got a lot of work ahead of them whenever that next general election is.
The British ISA, I thought was really interesting.
Your scoop, Fran?
I mean, we knew, but actually, I don't know whether. I mean, home we knew because the Chancellor told us. But home builders got a little bit of a lift on the back of it. I mean, does it make a difference to the British psyche?
Well, I'm interested. You're probably interested, Adrian.
Well, I think we're all interested, but it is a fundamental break with free market economics or Thatcherism.
But other countries have it, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Other countries are moving in a similar sort of direction, but it does just show you how different the world is now from the 1980s, that instead of deregulating the flow of money, we're trying to encourage the flow of money of pension schemes into our own economy.
But is that the only way you get growth? In a country like the UK.
Not the only way, but it's
the most assured way. A way.
It's
Adrian's
no, I think
so
to be
skeptical.
fair, it's a kind of you did see like an arsenal or a range of measures today. I'm not saying it was necessarily going to kind of pep up growth by the rates we were used to seeing years ago, but you did the British ISA is part of that raft of, what they're doing to the City of London, how they're changing listing, etc. Don't know how long this stuff takes to turn around, right? Like, how long, whether if we think that there's a general election this year, whether or not any of this is going to be tickling up growth that quickly. I'm not sure if the Chancellor was here, he would say it is. When we have Bim, the minister, the city minister, Bim Afalami, on this podcast, must be a month ago now. He sort of acknowledged that, didn't he, Fran, that this is long-term stuff.
I think also that they would say that pension funds are unnecessarily and unreasonably nervous about investing in Britain. And I think there may be some truth about that.
Stephanie actually just tweeted an OBR nugget, which is that the spending numbers from 2025 onwards, she says, may not have changed much, but real spending per head will be flat or falling after this year. So watch for headlines on that actually it's not, spending because of the population increase is going to diminish per person.
Which is partly why you're starting to hear more and more on the immigration debate from, as Adrian said earlier, 3 mentions or more from the Chancellor. But I think they will. I mean, if we think that Jeremy Hunt was the safe pair of hands Chancellor, I think that is unchanged today. Do you right? Okay, could we? And there was, if we think about earlier in the week, Bloomberg pieces around traders being nervous, thinking, "Oh my God, what is he going to do?" Because the poll this week that showed the Conservatives going to the lowest ever level since Ipsos Mori started recording in 1970. So, traders thought he's going to be so nervous contemplating those kind of numbers, he's going to try and do a Hail Mary. Well, I don't think he really did that.
Now, where does this leave Labour? I hear two things from Labour. One is that they think they've got quite a number of hidden pockets of money, a certain amount of hidden pockets of money that they will be able to get hold of and use, which would be very interesting. Well, I don't know the answers to that, Ben. They haven't told me that. But that's interesting since the Tory party has tried so hard to find these things, but they will talk about that. And the second thing, I think, is the reorganisation of the machinery of central government, the sort of things that Dominic Cummings talked about and then annoyed everybody so much that nothing really happened. We haven't had much actual reform of the central machinery of government.
It's hard.
I think you might, but a new government might come in and try to do that sort of thing. So I think that Labour, it won't have a lot of extra money. It may have a bit more than we think, and it may have an agenda for sort of institutional reform, which will be used to try and drive up government productivity and efficiency.
But it is hard and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
It's like moving an oil tanker.
If we have a Labour budget at some point soon, it's going to be a tricky budget. And all of the politics that we're looking at with the kind of the fringe of the party will be flipped. They have the same dynamic going on. It's not going to be kind of kumbaya.
That's a long time ago, kumbaya, in British politics.
My daughter's just let it on the recorder. It's very much in my life right now. Cracking tune.
Perfect way to end the podcast. Thanks for listening to this week's In the City. We'll be back next week, but in the meantime, if you like our show, please head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts, rate, review, and subscribe. It does help people find the show. This episode featured me, Francine Lacqua, with Allegra Stratton and Adrian Wooldridge. It was produced by Summer Sadi and Moses Handam. Additional editing by Rishi Bujay Cole.